Hello and welcome. I'm your host, author Ryan M. Oliver, and this is the Mighty Books Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to Mighty Books Podcast. Today with me, I have Helena Paivinen. Helena, how are you doing today?
I'm not doing too badly. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Thank you so much for coming on and chit-chatting today about your book. So let's chat about your book today. What's the title of the book?
Healing Mind, Body, and Soul, the trauma of addiction. Because as you probably know, there's a lot of trauma before and after, and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, after addiction as well,
Mm.
because it's not, a usual thing that most people go through.
No. There's a lot of severity of highs and lows that go with before you start something, and then usually
Mhm.
from I've not been addicted to anything, so you'll have to help bridge the gaps here on my knowledge. But trying to find a solution to a problem, usually it goes towards things that are not necessarily good for us, and then you
Mhm.
deal with the ramifications of that. And like you said, the PTSD afterwards, once you finally kick the habit,
Mhm.
definitely can rain holy hell on your psyche. So I get that. Now I saw that on the title or the cover of the book, you are one of several authors who have contributed to this anthology or collection of stories. How did you get involved with that project?
Actually, I saw a posting by Tina Clifton, the publisher, and she was looking for authors because she has her own story and experience with regards to a family member being addicted and almost dying, and that's a tremendous story as well. And so I reached out to her, and she replied right back, which was great, and we worked on it. She helped me through the process and had a team of editors. Also, I think there was three of them that helped me refine the wording and get the project completed. So there was a compilation of us authors, and some of them are quite well known. Now my brain goes to a farthest. I can't remember who he was a keynote speaker at, we had a book launch in Kelowna, which there was about 300 people there as well.
Cool.
So, yeah,
So do you know how many authors are the collection?
I think about over 20,
Wow.
maybe about 25. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's quite a bit. That's quite now. How much were you guys given a certain amount of space within the book, or you kind of it was like free reign, write your story, and then we'll make it fit.
Yeah, I think if my memory serves correctly, it was about 2,000 words to try to
Okay.
keep it to that. And yeah,
Was that a challenge?
well, I tend to be quite verbose. So as a little kid, because silence was key, being hidden was do good for my safety. So when I discovered my voice, well, first through alcohol, that I couldn't shut up when I was drinking. And then when I got into recovery, I tend to go on and on a bit. So you'll have to
Okay.
kind of monitor me on that.
Probably it's okay to have a little more to say and cut down a little bit than to try to stretch things out. You know what I mean? It's definitely when you get
Yeah,
more comfortable
definitely.
and you'll be more free flowing, I guess. What caused you to want to be a part of this project? What inspired you to share your story?
There's so many people that are dying. I remember Christopher Seguin. I know that the mother would be okay with me saying his word because it was quite public. He was the vice president of the university that I once taught at, and he had overdosed and died. And it was quite the public community shock because he was well known and well beloved, and he had a young 4-year-old son and a young wife. Because so many people that I know are dying, and they're not the people that you see in media. The street involved people are usually at the end stage of the disease. Like I make it akin to diabetes, right? When you're diagnosed with the disease of diabetes, you might be able to manage it with just medication. Some can do it just on exercise alone or just modifying their diet, whereas some people have to take oral prescribed drugs, and others have to take insulin shots up to 3 times or 4 times a day. And so the 3, 4 times a day people would be like the people that you see on the street,
Mhm.
the end spectrum of the disease. And it's a quite, life threatening, life shortening addiction is. And so because of that, there's no need. And so the people that I know are mostly professionals, nurses, doctors, dentists, lawyers, surgeons, and that's not usual phase of recovery that we see portrayed on TV.
Mm-mm. No, usually the stereotypical sight we see is someone who is, homeless, who's addicted and who's working, having a hard time keeping a job. Usually hygiene isn't very good. It's just the
Mm-hmm.
traits. Their life is going down in a spiral and they can't seem to keep anything straight. The really interesting kind of part about your story that what from the little you've told me or that I've read so far from your bio is you had high degrees, you went
Mm-hmm.
through a lot of schooling, you
Mm-hmm.
were in medical field, and
Mm-hmm.
it seemed like pretty successful medical field, handling yourself just fine, taking care of a lot of things, had a lot of responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
and it just behind the veil, you had this monster you were fighting, known as addiction, and it looked like it sounds like from a consume at least, you were battling two fronts, trying to just keep it under wraps, keep it together, is what it sounds like to me. I mean, am I nearing any kind of aim to the truth there?
Yeah, bullseye. Exactly. And, I was so ashamed of who I'd become. And, I overdosed on fentanyl about 2 decades ago, that before fentanyl was even known in the news. And I had applied some discarded fentanyl patches that I had found all over my body,
Oh,
and stupidly went to bed with them. And I woke up euphoric as heck, like angels were singing in my brain. And it was like a warm, soothing bath full of big, fluffy cotton balls. And I woke up and I thought, wow, I feel pretty good. So I put more on, which was really quite stupid. And then when I went to bed again and woke up in the morning, um, and when I came home, I realized I was overdosing and the levels were going too high. It was long acting, slowly seeping through my skin. So I ripped off the patches and scrubbed red raw my skin and prayed that I wouldn't overdose. I sat alone in my bathroom. It was far better to die, I thought, than to face my colleagues and show them who I was. I was a fraud, unlovable, damaged goods, dirty, unclean. And I knew they would find out when I died, of course, but at least I didn't have to face them when I did that.
yeah.
So luckily I didn't die, which was, well, of course it would be good. Would have been horrific for my family and friends. The aftermath, the tsunami of people that are left behind is quite horrible.
Yes, it is. Yeah, usually you don't. Sometimes it's unfortunate when people are going through that kind of trauma or depression or just they're fighting mentally for survival. They have kind of a short nearsightedness a little bit where
Mm-hmm.
they only see the right now, which I mean, it's hard
Mm-hmm.
when you're in pain and agony. Of course, you want that pain and agony to end, but then you don't have that foresight of what is this going to do to the rest of the people around me. And a lot of the times, not in every experience, but a lot of the times, people have a huge force, foundation to lean on, and they want to hold on to that independence because they're seen as the rock. They're seen as a brilliant person or a very hardworking. They're very highly revered as a professional, or they have a high title to some degree, or they're highly respected in many regards by family, friends, and colleagues. And the last thing you want to do is to blemish that good name. You're in some terms, especially to kids, you're their superhero. If you got kids, I have flaws. It's like the kids know they have, yeah, everyone has flaws, but it's so hard for us to kind of relinquish that, untarnished armor on us to be vulnerable and to say, yes, I'm having this problem, I'm having these issues. So it's such a huge thing. What made you finally did you open up to somebody? What event happened where you actually finally said, I'm going to shed this addiction? How did you come out of this?
I stupidly thought that more education would get me well. And so I did my master's degree and I was swallowing handfuls of Tylenol 1, which has codeine in it, which reverts to morphine when you take it. And so I was swallowing 10 tablets 3 times a day and then 8 Gravol at night to help me sleep. And I still maintained an A average. And I got good reviews, student reviews, and things when I was teaching, and then I made the mistake of blaming people. I
Mm.
came out openly in the paper because people were dying, and I didn't think it was, I don't know, I didn't want to be anonymous anymore,
Yeah.
and yeah, too many were dying,
Mm.
and people say like, why couldn't you stop? Well, it was like, addiction is cunning, baffling, powerful, deadly, and cruel. And when I was a nurse, I worked long shifts. And so we didn't stop usually for things like going to the bathroom. And as a result, I got a lot of bladder infections.
Mm.
And I was prescribed sulfa, an antibiotic, for that quite frequently. And I could take that antibiotic and it would do what it was meant to do, right? It would kill the bacteria. But after a while, I developed an allergy and I started to break out in a rash, an itchy rash, right? And had I been still taking that antibiotic, eventually I would have had trouble breathing and eventually I would have had anaphylaxis and died. And that's the same with drinking and alcohol. I could take the pills okay, or drink okay and stop, and it wasn't a problem. But eventually, over time, it was too late. I couldn't stop anymore. And so, I phoned my professional association asking for help, just because I knew that I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And, the funny thing is, it was never taught in nursing school. In medical schools, it's rarely taught, despite it being the number one health condition in ER.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, that was about it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now, so do you see, you said you since retired.
What's that?
You since retired from the medical field, correct?
Oh, yes, I yeah, medically
Okay.
retired. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how connected you are nowadays, but have you noticed or do you know of any programs or just conversations with like open literature trying to get people understand in the medical field that, hey, this is how we can handle addiction. From what I've heard from podcasts, the podcast books, people stories like yourself, a lot of the times when there is a problem, we try to do a quick fix, like here's a pill. That's not necessarily the problem because the problem we got to go to the source, which is within you and how you're handling certain issues. How do you handle stress? That's a big one. How do you handle stress? Are we looking at like that in the medical field, trying to go to the source of the problem rather than just mask the symptoms with medication? Are we doing anything like this?
Well, when I was teaching, one thing I brought in was an addictions component, substance abuse component to the School of Nursing, and the other professors took that up and they also started including it in the curriculum. And I would send my students to 12-step meetings, which they said were fantastic. And then other professors of psychiatry and mental health were doing that as well. And so that was a real, and I had them talking to people in recovery that were teaching at the college, working as professionals in the university as well.
Mhm.
And that has been really great. And I
Good.
think they're still doing it. And I've been out of touch with that for a while, but my hope is that they're still continuing to do that. And these 28, 30-day programs don't work. They do for the short term, but what I
Mhm.
found is I work a 12-step recovery. I can't say which one because of anonymity. Anonymity requires that we don't state the two-letter acronym. I can talk about it, 12-step programs, but I can't talk about which one. It's like if you're drinking soda pop, right? If you work for a Coca-Cola dealer, they might say you can't talk about Coca-Cola, but you can talk about soda pop. So I talk about that I work a 12-step recovery program. And in that, there's meditation, which is really wild. Like step 4 is about looking at myself and my character defects and how I am. And then what I do is I make amends for them, retribution. And I need to do that right now because I blamed my faculty and peers for me hiding,
Mhm.
but they didn't make me lie. They didn't make me. deceive people. I did that. So I apologize. I'm sorry. I was wrong for that. It was my decision to do that. And it wasn't until years later that I realized, holy cow, I'm the one who needs to take responsibility and not project it out. And we do that as addicts and alcoholics. We blame, 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 when
Mhm.
really it's our own projection and inability to accept that about how awful we've become. And so meditation, my brain, I started at 14 smoking pot, and it escalated to smoking it 3 times a day. And then by 19, I was a blackout drinker. I was walking and talking normally. So people said, you couldn't tell I was drunk. And so I've had years and decades of damaging. I have brain damage in essence. Still to this day, I'm 62. And so daily, what I need to do is reprogram, reformat, remodulate my brain. And so what I have to do is progressive relaxation to connect my brain to my body, because I lived in my head for so long, and my brain lies to me. So I have to connect with my body, progressively relax it, because that's, I'm always tense. And when I do that, then I have to get up to my brain and I relax my brain, and I relax my brain. And then in doing that, I start to reprogram and rewire those addictive pathways. And
Mhm.
only then can I get true recovery.
Interesting. And so you really have to consciously
Mm-hmm,
close the doors, put a padlock, and nail the door shut to that addiction in your head, and just
mm-hmm.
keep with the clean route. Really have to work at it. I mean, I've got a couple friends of mine who were alcoholics about 15, 20 years ago, and they've kept the door closed on that for 2 decades. And I was like, oh, so it's easier now. She goes, no, I work on it every single day, and it's exhausting. And it's very interesting to think about that kind of commitment to not doing something. It's just, and so I assume you'd have to replace that, because once you take that out, you're used to going to that for stress relief, for boredom, for everything. What did you replace addiction with to try to not go back, not to fall off the wagon, as they say? What have you replaced it with? Anything more healthy?
Some people actually, if you don't treat the isms, which is the character defects and the irritability and the anxiety and the sleepless and restlessness, they go to other things like process addiction, like gambling or sex or shopping or spending money or eating or not eating, anorexia.
Yeah.
And for me, what I've done is I attend Zoom meetings are great. You can go on AA or NA online, and you get 24 hours a day, every single minute of every second of the day, recovery online meetings. And so I attend those, and I attend open meetings here as well. I attend them at least 3 times a week, and I share whenever asked. And I'm of service, helping others, because without that, there's no meaning in life. I need to help others, and reading literature, and doing an inventory every day. I get up in the morning, I review my day, what it's going to be like. I ask the universe for help. They say God, which I don't like. I don't like that word. I like the words higher power instead, because power is about atoms and molecules and energy. And they say that inside every woman and child, man, woman, and child, is a fundamental knowledge of a higher power. And I have knowledge that I have a brain in me, but I'm not the brain. My brain tells my organs how to operate, but what tells my brain how to tell my organs how to operate? So there's something, even greater than me, that is wiser than me. And so I access that, make conscious contact with that every day by doing that meditation practice and then progressive relaxation. And it's amazing. It's amazing. Like one instance, I was driving with my brother was driving me home through a snowstorm in December, and I was worried for him because he had to drive hours after me. There were cliffs and mountains and treacherous conditions. And so I just asked, I put it out to the universe, could you please stop it from snowing? 10 minutes later, it stopped snowing. Like, I mean, incredible. Like, you should do it even just to get those incredible, insane. They say it's catapulted into the fourth dimension. And really, I mean, it's incredible. Like we were driving and I wanted apples and we drove through past fruit stands. Oh, I want an apple. I want an apple on this busy highway. Go around the corner and in the middle of this field, well, actually right by the side of the road, it was a field. There was an apple tree. And it was like, how does that happen, man? How
I
does
know.
that happen? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
You think it's like coincidence. People say, "Oh, it's just coincidence," but it's like
it's
when
not.
it
Yeah,
happens a lot,
yeah.
it's so strange. I mean, actually, I had something like that happen literally this week. I've got a friend of mine
Hmm.
that I messaged. I was just texted him the night before about getting together, and B, he's going to be a beta reader for my next novel, which is pretty exciting. And I messaged him, and then all of a sudden, I don't see him very much anymore. Maybe once every few months, I might see him at work or something. And that literally the next morning, I turn the corner and there he is. We're from opposite sides of the building, and we just stop, wave, and then we come closer and we have a conversation. I'm like, well, that's serendipitous. I mean, I was literally talking to you last night. He was like, yeah, here we are. This is great. It's just so funny how we all just chalk it up to it's nothing. But is it nothing, or is it,
Yeah,
energy moving
yeah.
and that kind of thing,
Exactly,
Open
exactly.
open up the kind of
Well, when you
spirituality.
think about in terms of recovery,
What's that?
exactly, spirituality.
Yeah.
Spirituality,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
And in the meetings and reading literature and watching, basically when I speak, my words are coming from my brain, and those are just electrical molecules. And so it's firing in my brain and it's coming out through my mouth and it's floating through the air and it's entering into your ear
Hmm.
and into your brain, and it's becoming new chemistry inside of you, and it's forming new neuronal networks inside of your brain as well. And then it mixes up with your biology, your history, your past experiences, and so you're thinking thoughts which then come out through your mouth and enter into the air and into my brain.
Yeah, it's a very odd exchange, isn't it? When you break
Yeah.
it down to its simplest form. I mean, it's kind of like explaining, between the chicken and the egg, which one came first? It's like, well, how did the chicken get there? Well, it was born out of hatched an egg. Well, how did the egg get there? Well, a chicken had
Mm-hmm.
to lay it.
Yeah.
Where do you start on this circle? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't frigging know.
Exactly.
I don't frigging know. Hey, all, if you've made it this far on purpose and enjoyed yourself, consider joining the Mighty Books Podcast Patreon. There, you get mighty benefits like early access to new episodes, exclusive members only content, and even free audiobooks. It's a great way to enjoy more insightful interviews, fun conversations, and more mighty stories. Finally, it supports the show so I can continue to deliver top-notch content to you, my mighty listeners. Thanks again for everything, and as always, stay mighty and keep reading. Yeah,
Yeah.
so diving into spirituality seems to help ground you, as it seems like, to kind of ground you back to staying on the path to your best self,
Yeah.
and yeah, not leaning towards anchoring towards those kind of old vices that you want to desperately try to avoid. And it takes so much work, but I mean, I'm hoping probably some family's been helping you or has helped you with that in the past, and hopefully you still have a pretty good foundation of support, I would assume at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And the worst thing to do is cut off connection, because
Yes.
that just drives, like the family did drive off, uh, cut off connection. And that just gives you all the reason to keep using.
Mhm.
There's no point anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. I like that you mentioned the little programs like the 20 and 30-day programs. They just don't work. Or they work
Mm-hmm.
for the time being, but when you go
Mm-hmm.
back into the environment again, it just totally breaks down. And I've actually done reading on that before. I want to say it was there's some business book or some habits book I've read. Atomic Habits is a great one if you've ever read it before. It's really wonderful. I can't remember if it came out of this one, but basically said exactly you did. They go into it, and then unless you change the environment around you,
Mm-hmm.
you can't do it. There was apparently There was accounts of folks going overseas, so fighting in Vietnam, and over in Vietnam they became crazy addicted to opium right over there.
Hmm.
And in you're dealing with stress because you're thinking about to get shot and attacked by
Hmm.
the Vietnamese, the enemy at that point. And then it's wicked strange. It's a weird location, stress, 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 stress. And then it's there, it's bountiful. Okay. And then you leave, they come back to the US, and I think they said a like 80% cut cold turkey. They just stopped using. Now that means about 20%. Again, I'm pulling from sources I can't see right in front of me. Continued it. But that's amazing that you change the environment in which you became addicted, and all of a sudden the addiction goes away. It happened to
Hmm.
do with the environmental factors and stress on that. So, I mean, I'm sure you really had to take a step back and identify what external factors were causing you to aim towards alcohol and drugs and addiction.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
how long did it take you, or did you identify those and try to do your best to stay away from those sources of stress?
And it's interesting because my husband, who does addiction medicine, is in recovery, and he used IV Demerol, and he can't even to this day watch people inject with syringes because it triggers that little happy memory inside his brain.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm okay now. Like I can go into bars and restaurants and things like that and be fine with it. And I'm okay with it now. It's just so habituated in me. Like I haven't had a drink for over 40 years, so I couldn't imagine even the smell doesn't bother me.
Well,
Yeah. So,
that's a great thing. So,
but if you're coming off and if you're getting out of treatment and going straight back to the streets, yeah, you have a snowball's chance in hell of getting better.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really dislike the idea of, how they always just say, well, it's just willpower. It's just willpower.
Oh
There's
God, no, it's not.
Oh, it's not really willpower. Is there willpower? Yeah, to a point. Okay, there's always some willpower. But really looking at the environment in it, you have to identify the root cause for pulling that way. Willpower will only stop you for so long. If it's there and it's convenient, the human mind is going to gravitate towards what it knows. And regardless if it's good for you or if it's bad for you, we are so
Hmm.
good at maintaining that cycle. It's so hard to break a cycle. That's why, I mean, it's a little different than, drug addiction. Think of food addiction. Same thing. Addiction is addiction. It's hard to break that cycle to not do something. We want to, kind of like that old adage, an object's in motion stays in motion. Very hard to stop. It takes a lot of energy to stop doing something.
Yeah, and I would challenge anyone that's listening that if you think it's that easy, to please stop using your iPhone and any computer for 10 days and then just, see. It's like trying to stop diarrhea or vomiting. There's no way. There's no way. Willpower or having a baby, there's no way that you can willpower not doing that,
Yeah.
right? There's forces that are greater than yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just crazy making. They did an experiment once with rats. To one could There was lever for water, which was necessary for life, and one with cocaine.
I've heard about this.
And life, I mean, water was necessary for these rats to live, but they didn't stop using cocaine. They just kept taking cocaine, cocaine, cocaine until they died.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's that powerful.
Well, I also heard some kind of to add on to that, which was really interesting. You mentioned about not cutting out friends and family. You want to keep those connections. They did a
Mm-hmm.
similar experiment where they had water versus the drugs, cocaine, whatever medium it was, and they had the rat isolated
Mm-hmm.
versus the rat with a group of people, a group of other peers, or the rats, right? The rats that were with peers would drink the water mostly, but then they'd have a good time and they'd have some cocaine. They'd go back and party, and they'd go back and forth and do this. And so that collectively they were fairly healthy. But you put that one rat by itself, isolated, completely cut off from the rest of her pack. Same thing, went to the cocaine and died, and just
Mm-hmm.
just continue that good feeling until no longer could breathe anymore. It is a huge factor to make sure you stay with people who can support you. We can't do this on our, we can't go through life by ourselves.
No way.
It's just not, we are social creatures. It's how it
Hmm.
is. We have to be with people. Even if you're not a social person, you got to have that. You have to have that connection to somebody. It's okay to be alone, but not be lonely. You need to be with people. You need to be with someone who cares about you and who you care back. It's kind of like that. I think there's a other studies where they talk about like the grandma effect, where grandparent effect, where the grandparents actually live
Hmm.
longer because they're
Hmm.
living for their grandchildren.
Hmm.
Very similar. It's a very strong force, and it's
Hmm.
super interesting to me. Now, I'm really interested. You kind of mentioned this already. I think you already answered the question, but I'd love to dive in on a little bit. You started early. You started doing
Hmm.
using like drinking early and doing some drugs early to help you kind of cope. Now, how were you able to hide your addiction really? It sounded like you hid your addiction really well from your colleagues. How did you do that? Were you just it was just natural now to do this? I'm very interested in how you did this.
Yeah, the pot smoking and the alcohol is harder to hide because of the smell. And yeah, when you're drunk, it's really quite easy to tell. But when I was taking narcotics and sedative hypnotics, except for the slurring of the word for the words with the sedative hypnotics, the narcotics were really quite easy to hide, except for the pinpoint pupils or the dilated pupils with the stimulants.
Interesting.
Well, I didn't do stimulants, but yeah, so it's really, really, really easy to hide narcotic use, which is an unfortunate aspect of that. Yeah, very easy.
Because it doesn't change your mood necessarily. It just fixes or it appeases that craving for the time. So
Hmm.
you're kind of at zero. You're kind of at
Yeah.
your center, unfortunately, while you're on it, it sounds like.
People who drink daily and constantly usually have to drink to feel normal, to have
Mhm.
that baseline of normal. And they can't even get drunk anymore. And same with opiates, just to feel normal. If I've been using constantly on and using heavily, I
Mhm.
have to use to feel normal. It's hard to get that euphoria. So keep escalating and escalating and escalating. And that's why people die of overdose because they have to keep escalating the amount that they're
Yeah.
using. There was another experiment that was done with monkeys, baby monkeys. And one monkey, baby monkey, was put into a cage with a real live mama monkey. And another monkey was put into a with a steel monkey. The steel mama monkey was shaped like a mama monkey, covered with fur. Um, and so they had the same food, the same water, the same environmental. And the baby monkey with the steel monkey died, whereas the other monkey with the mama monkey lived and thrived. And that's why that connection is so important as well.
Oh, absolutely. Having good connections with your parents, especially
Hmm.
the mother who
Yeah,
nurtures, is absolutely super vital.
yeah.
100%. Relationships are just important. There really can't be, there's no substitution for a good relationship.
Hmm.
It just, there's not. We have seen it time in and time out with humans and other mediums, as in, rodents and chimpanzees or monkeys or other animals we've looked at. It's just the way it is. I mean, they talk about socializing your pets, like our dog. Socialize your dog, socialize your cat. Make sure they're good with other people. They're usually happier that way. So are
Hmm.
people. Go
Hmm.
figure. Go figure. So I'm curious with the story.
Hmm.
You wrote the story. Is just kind of a summary of your life, or did you have to pick one particular instance to really kind of dive in on? What was the story? How did it go?
Yeah, for me, I went on a weird tangent about chickens, and yeah, I know
Interesting.
it was
Chickens. Okay.
chickens. When chickens they sense difference, and then they start pecking and pulling out feathers. And I was bullied a lot because when I started school, I couldn't speak English. We spoke only Finnish at home,
Oh, really?
and so yeah, so I was very ostracized and marginalized. And I remember one little boy, Jimmy, he always peed his pants, and we had to hold hands before we went out for recess and lunch. And nobody would hold little Jimmy's hand except me. And I was so puffed out with pride that I would do that. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that nobody wanted to hold hands with me. That's why I held little Jimmy's hand. But we, in the story, you were given carte blanche. And so some people did a historical overview, of their childhood and upbringing, and me, I did more of an analogy, allegory of growing up with these chickens that would peck at me and beat me up and bully me, and how that ended up being. And the trauma that's caused is like blackout drinker when you're a young girl and your boyfriend's older. And a few years ago, I remember a memory resurfaced, and it was about me. Like, I asked a friend of mine, like, what happened, and she said, "Well, we found you naked, crying in a corner." And yeah, so they stopped what they were doing, and it was like, why did you even start, right?
Mm.
So things like that, and going to, like, I mean, going to he worked with people that were older. I think the man and wife might have been in their 30s, and I was in 15, 16, and it was Saturday night. We were to be watching a video, and I thought, a drama or a comedy, right? And they were giving us free alcohol. Well, this my boyfriend was older, so he was of drinking age, and on comes on porno with
Oh.
bondage and masks, black leather, right?
Mm.
So that kind of trauma is what happens during. And when I was a little kid, I was never held or hugged or
Mm.
cuddled or said I love you, and that's only because my parents, like, my dad fell out of a tree when he was 10 years old, and his dad yelled and screamed at him, you're a stupid kid. So they never couldn't give me what they didn't give, right? And so
Mm.
that being held and cuddled and hugged and soothed when you're a kid develops oxytocin in your brain, and it soothes you and develops these attachment neurons, which comfort you in times of distress when you get older. And
Mm.
if you don't have those, there's no other way of knowing how to soothe anxiety or fear except through alcohol and drugs.
Yeah, and I assume that you get any kind of intimacy at all, just with a touch or a nice gesture or even a
Mm-hmm.
hug or something. All of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, you're like, "Oh, I like this. This is great.
Mm-hmm.
This is so nice." And so then you're easily addicted to
Mm-hmm.
that feeling too, which makes you
Mm-hmm.
susceptible to other things like different
Mm-hmm.
drugs and whatnot. And then you just compound that with alcohol, which
Mm-hmm.
already loses your inhibitions quite a bit. Mm.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cocktail of destruction right there. And you're not trying. This is just the hand you were dealt, unfortunately. It's
Mm-hmm.
and I like that you mentioned, they can't give you what they didn't have. It's
Mm-hmm.
it goes back to the old adage, monkey see, monkey do. I see it with my kids. They do
Mm-hmm.
how I treat them, they treat others. And
Mm-hmm.
when, you have days where you're very tired and stressed and you lash out irrationally, and then they learn that trait and they do the same thing back, unless you go and address that one issue, it won't
Mm-hmm.
fix itself. It just compounds and
Mm-hmm.
gets worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
So it is completely rational to me that's how addiction can start. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
do you think addiction is more of a learned trait to cope with a stressful environment, or do you think it is partly genetic too? Because I've heard some folks are just more predisposed to it than others. Like, I mean, from a medical background, what do you think? What do you know?
Yeah, there's a two-step hypothesis out there. Two-step, meaning that you first have the genetic predisposition. Like, if you don't have the genetics for diabetes, no matter how many donuts and sugary drinks you drink, you're not going to develop diabetes. So you need to first have the genetic predisposition, and then you need the second hit, which would be the first is genetics, second is environmental. So to turn that gene on, you need that environmental trauma or incident that occurs that triggers that to become active in your body system.
Okay. Okay. So it's kind of a nature nurture mix.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Yeah,
it seems like to
exactly.
me. A lot of that is nature nurture kind of mixture. So I mean, there's a lot of different like evolutionary biologists I've listened to that it sounds like you're kind of whatever genetics you're born with, you're gonna have to deal with it. It's like the environment is great, fantastic, or it's terrible, but your core self, that's your genetics, and then whatever you learn, whatever traits you learn on the outside, that's as you've gotten older. That's the nature part taking over or nurture part
Mm-hmm.
taking over. Yeah, it's a very interesting, very interesting dynamic between those two, genetics and
Hmm.
nurture. Very interesting, very interesting. So now when you guys were doing the actual anthology or the collection of stories, did you guys get a chance to read each other's, or was it
Hmm.
you did? Okay, great,
Hmm.
great. And give feedback too?
Oh no, oh no. Oh, in
No?
that regard, no, we didn't. Yeah. Just
Okay.
when the book came out, yeah, we were
Oh,
able
okay. Oh
to.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, okay, okay.
No, that would have been interesting.
I think so too, yeah. Because I mean it might have, I feel like it would have been great, but maybe you would have changed your style a little bit. You know what I mean? Yeah, well, that's good that you guys were at least able to read it afterwards, obviously. So, how long do you know how
Yeah,
long the
yeah.
project took to get done? Because I imagine that's a lot of time, a lot of work.
Yeah, I think it took a couple of years. Yeah,
Oh,
getting the authors
wow.
and then doing all the editing. And I'm not sure though. You'd have to talk to Tina Clipston about that because she probably would know better. But
Sure.
they were very rigorous and on time and provided a lot of support. So yeah, I would highly recommend her if you're ever looking for a publisher.
Sure, sure, sure. That's really great. That's really great. Well, hey, let's I want to figure out where people can get copies of this book. So
Hmm.
where can they get copies and learn about, the you guys' experiences and hopefully get some insight to how to come out of it a lot better off. So where can they get copies of this book?
Tina was distributing it through major bookstores and also Amazon has one, and apparently it was the Amazon #1 bestseller in the category of substance abuse.
Wow.
And so, yeah, Amazon is a great place to get the book, and that's about it.
Okay. Awesome. 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 Helena, thank you so much for coming on and chatting me about this. I know it's a sensitive subject and I'm glad you're so open about it. I think that's really the way we're going to bridge the gap and catch people before they get addicted to anything. Is just talking about it, dealing with
Mhm.
stresses and being open about your experiences. So thank you for being brave and actually doing that and putting it out to the world and chatting with me today. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. And I was thinking about the AIDS crisis in 1980s when it first came out,
Mm,
and if people would have stayed in the closet, there probably would still not be a cure for AIDS. And so I would encourage anyone that's struggling to reach out, and if you have the ability to come out, and because recovery is truly possible, not only possible but absolutely magnificent. So thank you for your time, Ryan. I
mhm.
really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah,
You're going to hopefully be saving lives because of it.
you know what? I hope so too. Again, thank you for your part and what you're playing this. That's excellent. Okay, guys, I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. It was a heck of an insight for me, that's for sure. It was very interesting to learn all about Helena's insight to her experience with dealing with addiction and to go check out their book. And what's the title of the book again? Just so everyone knows.
Healing mind, body, and soul, the trauma of addiction.
Okay. Yep. Go get that book. Check it out. It's on Amazon. It apparently was #1 in that category, which is super impressive. And maybe reach out to the publishers and see if you have your own stories, maybe you can be featured in another anthology in the future. Who knows? That'd be kind of cool. The only way you guys are going to get better is by talking. That's really the best way to start open that book. It might be hard. It might be hard to open those wounds up and just try to air them out. That way, hopefully, you can get better and get recovered. That's the best way to do it, I think. All right, guys, I hope you had a great time listening to this, learned a lot. I know I did. And have a great rest of your day. And as always, stay mighty and keep reading.